I've just bought a lot of books. Okay, these books are very varied. Um, they are all bought. They were all bought by me. There are no promotions, no freebies, no gifts, any of that stuff. Actually, that's not true. Some were for my birthday last week. So let's go through them. Some I've read bits of, or have started rather than read bits of. This is extraordinary. It's called Wired for Culture by Mark Pagel. It's one of those. It's Penguin. I don't approve of the title Wired for Culture. Too much. There's too much talk of our brains being wired. Kind of computational theory of mind. We're kind of wired, hardwired. That sort of materialist notion. But this is brilliant. I mean, I've only read, I don't know, 50 pages or something. But essentially, it talks mainly about the propagation of ideas and how swiftly the propagation of ideas has expanded evolution and culture and our civilization. So the very fact that we're always talking about our genetic inheritance. Well, in fact, our genetic inheritance is an extremely slow one, whereas our intellectual inheritance happens more than generationally. It happens day by day. We share ideas, and our culture shifts and changes and recalibrates as these ideas propagate. Sometimes negatively, and I think neuroscience is sort of bogus neuroscience. Neuroscientism is one of the areas where, at the moment, there are areas in culture that are taking a slightly negative tack, marketing, jurisprudence, social policy, etc. But actually, it's the speed by which these ideas have an impact on our culture, which is what this book is about. And it's really, really good and beautifully written. This is The Transmigration of Bodies by Yuri Herrera, who's a Mexican writer, I think. I've started reading. It's not very long. I started reading it, but I was drunk. So, quite frankly, I had no idea what was going on. And then I abandoned it. And the next time I picked it up, I was also drunk and didn't understand what was going on. But it's a kind of weird. It seems to me there's a terrible disease happening that's killing everybody, and then but it's a kind of crime novel at the same time, and it sort of has, it is a bit Quentin Tarantino. It's also a bit Raymond Chandler. It's got a bit of sci-fi in it. It's short. It's kind of interesting, but I really need to be sober when I read it. These are the complete novels of Flann O'Brien, published in the Everyman edition, which is a very beautiful edition. The reason I got this, I was at a book talk and of a brilliant Irish writer, Mike McCormack of Solar Bones, was talking about the sort of holy trinity of Irish writing of Joyce, Beckett, and Flann. And I was thinking, I've never read a word. So I thought I should, and I found this edition. I started reading At Swim Two Birds, which is a beautiful name for a novel, and it feels very Joycean, but I haven't finished it. Now we have this book, Architecture's Odd Couple, which is by Hugh Howard and published by Bloomsbury Press. That's the American Bloomsbury Press, I think. And this is essentially about Frank Lloyd Wright and Philip Johnson. A lot of people know about Frank Lloyd Wright, a great, innovative, creative, visionary architect of the early part of the 20th century. Philip Johnson is kind of responsible for the great skyscraper cubes of American cities. I think he's he is the skyline of Houston or something. But actually, he's a much which one could see as a negative, actually is a much more interesting designer than that. And actually, I saw a documentary about 10 years ago about his own home when he was in his 80s or something in Connecticut. And essentially every room was in a different part of this huge sort of 20-acre site. So he had a sort of bedroom, which was this glass cube. And then his office was sort of down a hill, and he had an art gallery, his own art gallery, which is sort of near a lake or something. And it was just extraordinary. So I'm really looking forward to that. Shylock is My Name by Howard Jacobson, published by Vintage. Now, I've read a couple of novels by Howard Jacobson, and I don't care for them. I don't get him. I don't get why people rate him. Yes, he's kind of funny, but there's something very artificial and contrived about his novels. But I've always been fascinated by the character of Shylock. And I mean, I first read Merchant of Venice about 35 years ago. I've seen a number of productions, but I don't know what this is. I think it's kind of half novel, half sort of disquisition on Shylock and Judaism. Something else, don't know, but I'm really looking forward to that. Then we go to Julian Barnes's The Noise of Time, another slim novel published by Chatto, is it? I don't know what that. Jonathan Cape. It's about Dmitri Shostakovich and Stalin, and there's a very famous moment in Shostakovich's life when he wrote his opera Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk, and he was suddenly deemed as sort of decadent and not sufficiently writing, ideologically sound music. And it was touch and go whether he would be he would be sort of disappeared and then executed or sent to the camps in Siberia. And I think at some point Stalin intervened or something, but it's a particular point in Shostakovich's life which is kind of completely fascinating if you're thinking about the intersection of culture and politics in that hugely ideologically driven era. Now, philosophical investigations, Ludwig Wittgenstein. I've read bits of Wittgenstein, especially the Tractatus, a lot. Tractatus was his first book. This was his last book, although it was essentially compiled from his writings. This is the great text about language games. The idea that that different communities, different sets of people create a semi-public language with which to talk to each other, and that without understanding that language, we can't communicate with each other because we don't actually know what that language game is. And I think that's absolutely true, and especially in my particular interest, which is how religion and spirituality is talked about, and the kind of the narrowness of interpretation or meaning of words used by people who are only really interested in secular culture, means that it's actually hard for people who want to talk about the notion of the sacred and the notion of how the sacred fits in secular culture. And I feel that there is this place in between, this silence where it just becomes white noise, and Wittgenstein talks about that. I will read that slowly. Greetings Hero, stories by Aidan O'Reilly. This is an Irish writer I heard read along with Mike McCormack a couple of weeks ago. The story called Contempt was just so fantastically plainly eloquent about builders in a building yard in Dublin. So all the kind of cadences and inflections of the Dublin accent are there in the syntax rather than any attempt to create the dialect in spelling or whatever. And it was just beautiful. Care of Wooden Floors by Will Wiles, published by Fourth Estate. Any novel that's called Care of Wooden Floors has got to be great. And now I read at the back, Oscar is a minimalist composer, got to be great. But actually, the reason I bought this was that I bumped into his agent, who is a person I knew about 20 years ago, I haven't seen for 20 years. I would never have recognised him. And he's got many fine writers and successful writers, but he said this took him so long to place, and this was the novel he was most proud of placing. And you can imagine, called Care of Wooden Floors, about a minimalist composer. That's not going to be an easy sell. He placed it, and the writer is on his third novel now, so I'm reading that. And then finally, Mirror Mirror by Simon Blackburn, The Uses and Abuses of Self-Love. Simon Blackburn is a very sort of ecumenical and philosopher who writes about a lot of stuff. He teaches at Oxford and at Chapel Hill in America, and even at Cambridge. This book was inspired by his frustration, if not horror, at the L'Oreal campaign because you're worth it. But really, actually, it's about what it means to have a relationship with ourselves, and the notion of self-esteem, the notion of what we feel of pride, of dignity, of what our entitlements are, and all of that. I've read quite a lot of it, and it's fascinating. And yeah, it's a very interesting book in terms of there has been over the last 20 years this notion that the sort of a sort of emancipation of the individual, that our self has somehow has inalienable rights without any kind of moral or ethical commitment from ourselves or consideration of others. It's like, it's my right to, I have a right to do that. Forgive the accent there, but it is. It's almost a kind of knee-jerk default reaction of someone who is being prevented from doing something or preventing from getting something, that it's their right to it, and kind of understanding where that comes from, understanding what it means to have self-esteem, what it means to have dignity, what it means to have pride, all of those things, what it means simply to have a self, is very interesting. But that's it. That's the last of my books, a varied bunch. I do hope you are interested and you buy some of them. Yeah, that's it. Bye-bye.